anything that I found wisdom in, any part of my life that I found some wisdom in has been a hard, bloody slog for me. I read a lot. I do a lot in my life, but that wisdom part, finding the wisdom, um, you're not just fighting against right and wrong in your own life, good and bad in your own life. Um, you're not only fighting against, you're trying to figure out what is good information, what's bad information. You're fighting against yourself. You're fighting against your own better nature, if you like, or you're fighting against your own worse nature. The two competing imps on your shoulder. One is the good imp, the bad imp, or the devil and the angel, one on each shoulder, both whispering in your ear, both trying to get you to go in different directions. And I think without the wisdom in life, you tend to go with the the devil because he's taking you down the easier road. And it's just so much time and energy that is wasted. I look at it like that. I mean, I look at my life like that and think, from one perspective, it's time and energy wasted. But you get to a stage where you start finally figuring out things. You finally figure out what is the things that are good for you and the bad, and what's bad for you. And then it doesn't seem so bad, I don't think. Then you start to see, well, maybe it wasn't so much time wasted, right? So, one thing that I understand about my own wisdom or about wisdom in general is don't let anyone convince you that there's one kind of wisdom, that the best wisdom for you is the general wisdom that is taught in universities or is taught by anybody else. The best wisdom for you is the kind of wisdom that leads you to the life that you want to lead, right? So the happiness and the contentment that you want to have, right? Being good with yourself, with the life that you want to lead, with the life that you're living, having peace of mind with yourself. I think that is the best kind of wisdom that you can have. I don't think wisdom can be found so much in knowledge. I mean, you can learn a lot. If you look behind me, I've got a lot of books there. A lot of the books that I collected over many years. Some of them I read, some of them I've yet to read. But I found that to get true wisdom out of books, you need to read the same book over again, and not, read it once and then read it again for the second time a week later, 2 weeks later, but let it settle and read it again. I've got several books that I read every year. Christmas Carol is just about to come, so that takes me a day to read it. And every time I read it, I get something different. Man's Search for Meaning, you've heard me talking about that so many times. They're two of the books that I read over and over again. And it's just that every time I go back to them, I find something deeper inside, or I find something deeper inside myself that responds to something different in the book that I couldn't have seen the year before. So you can know a thing and still not have the wisdom to either make sense of it or to make use of it. And I always knew, let me give you an example. I always knew that smoking was bad for me, always, from right from the beginning. Maybe not from, I mean, I had my first cigarette when I was about 7 years of age, so maybe not then. But once I started, I was able to go out and buy my own cigarettes and smoke. I knew that it wasn't good. I knew that it looked cool. When you're 14, 15 years of age and you're stood in a street corner with a cigarette hanging out your mouth, inhaling smoke, blowing it back out, you think it's cool. So you've got that competition for anything that is taking you towards a sane viewpoint of what you're doing, right? So, but I had so many attempts to try and stop smoking over the years. It was unreal, and it just seemed like a battle that I was never going to win. But I think looking back on it, that I didn't have the wisdom to understand that the discomfort was part and parcel of, it was really the only thing that was going to get me past the smoking, to get me past that first. I mean, people used to say, "Oh, the cravings only last for 7 days." It's bullshit. For me, they just lasted and lasted and lasted because that's where I was. That's where my mind was at, right? even though you certainly get past the worst of it in 7 days. But everyone's different, and it depends on what you do. You can turn up the dial uh, on all of your cravings and the feelings of discomfort and the feelings of woe is me and victimhood, or you can turn up the dial on your strengths and your understanding that it is a wisdom not to smoke, and that whatever you need to put yourself through in order to get to that other side of not smoking again, then that's it. So, and I think it's not just the discomfort that you go through in the first month that you don't understand when you're younger. Um, like I said, I tried to stop smoking so many times that it made it difficult then for me in the long run, because every time you try and stop and you fail, it's a mark on the other side of your ability to be able to handle these things. And then when you go for it the next time, then your self-confidence has already taken a knock or many knocks down the road. So you not only have to get through that initial discomfort. I think the most I ever did was a year, maybe. Probably even then. Am I thinking right? Maybe 3 months. I can't remember. But it wasn't long, and it was normally a day or 2 days or a week or that kind of stuff, and then I go back onto them again. But afterwards, once you go through the initial discomfort, and you get discomfort that follows you for a few years, and it's normally associated with something like the smell. Not the smell of an ashtray, but the smell of a freshly lit cigarette. This is for me, and I can only talk about myself. And I think it's a huge part of the pathways that form that habit. The pathways in your brain that don't disappear. The habit pathways are kind of the best way to look at it is like a ditch, and the ditch is there underneath it all, or a road, a forestry tract that overgrows. The road is still there, but it's overgrown. Or maybe a house that has fallen down. You wouldn't know it was a house until you start digging around and you see the remnants of it. So it's always there, but it's just overgrown with, or there's a parallel path that comes along that you build later on that builds new habits. So wisdom also comes in fighting against your own prejudices. And I'm not talking about the modern shape where you're not allowed to judge or to have prejudices with other people. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I've lived in a lot of different places, a lot of different countries. Being from England, born in London and then raised in Ireland, and I've got my mum's English, my dad's Irish, so you see two sides of the same perspective. They're so much alike, English and Irish people, so much alike, and yet the differences are small, but they're amplified. So you'll get the English don't like the Irish, and the Irish don't like the English in general. But then when you come over to Ireland, the Dublin people don't like the Cork people, right? And it's just there's a prejudice there. When you're in Dublin, the north side of Dublin doesn't like the south side, and vice versa. There's a prejudice. If you're living in the north side, the people from Coolock don't like the people from Darndale. There's a prejudice. If you're living in Darndale, the people from Primrose don't like the people from Buttercup, right? There's a prejudice. Same with the streets, and then the same with your neighbours, that kind of stuff. And even in your family, to a certain degree, you've got certain things that you'll have prejudice on, right? So it's just a natural part of life, But I'm talking about the prejudices that you have inside yourself against yourself. One of the biggest prejudices that I think that can foster automatically is for us to prejudice the quick road, the speedy road, the easy road, rather than taking the long way around, right? The part of you that says, I'll show you a little shortcut over here. No questions asked, right? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You won't say no more, right? I think the same thing with some of the simplifications that we have in our lives. The things that we use to get things done faster, or the quick fixes, the instant gratification. These things that don't get you anywhere really quickly. They may solve a problem in the moment, but they don't really solve it. They take you backwards. And I think worst are kind of the patterns of thought and action that hold you back from getting to your own self, right? The demons that you make up in your own mind. Now, these are all quick fixes that we use to hide from the things, or not to think about, not to try and move our emotions. There's a lot of things that we do when we have a certain emotion, that we're trying to move our emotions from one spot to another, instead of figuring out what it is that is causing the emotions in the first place. We try and just switch the emotions because we don't like the emotion, right? So, for instance, you don't like the emotion of being called a drunk, so you'll figure out some other way of calling yourself. I'm an occasional drinker, or I get a bit leery when I'm drunk, or I get a bit this, or whatever it is. So I think wisdom is telling you where to go. It's saying that you need to take the longer route because you haven't got enough experience yet to take the shortcut. I think shortcuts are wise when you're getting to the same spot, but now you've figured out a way of doing it in a shorter space of time. But I think without the experience in life, you're trying to take shortcuts because you're trying to jump over the experience, trying to be smart about things. And a lot of the time, I think most of the time, it just doesn't work. And the instant gratification brain is very convincing. It's convincing you that this is the best road to take because it's the easy, and why not have it easy every so often, right? Why wait for the thing that you want to have? If you want to get the car down the road that is $50,000 and you can't afford $50,000, why don't you just get it on tick? You can pay for it over 4 years, or 5 years, or 6 years. By the time you get it home and you start to drive it, and then you start to see the bills coming in, then it's a different story, right? One of the best things in my life was always, go back to the cigarettes again. Give up now. Doesn't matter. Start again tomorrow. You'll be grand. And for me, I felt like I was finally getting a bit wiser in my life, in some areas of my life anyway. When I committed to being a better dad, taking that 100% responsibility for that part of my life. And a big part of that was admitting to myself that after being a dad for 21 years, that there were just lots of holes in what I thought being a dad was. I opened myself up to the areas where I could fix those holes. However much that it was that important to me that it would, if I spent the rest of my life having to do this, which I think that's another realization, is that there's never a point where you stop learning. This is a lifelong role that changes as you change, that changes as your kids change, as you take on, you don't step out of the fatherly role, but when your kids have kids, then you step into the grandfather. So you're also a father, but it's a weird thing. It's a strange situation to be in. And then it's amazing, I think, what else happens after that. I think once you start adjusting certain parts of your life and seeing the holes in certain parts of your life, and you try to look at that to fix it, you start to get wisdom in that area of your life. Like I said, wisdom for me is a personal thing that helps you in your life to get to the places where you want to go, or that helps you to help your children to get to the places where they need to go. Do you know what I mean? So that's it. That's all I've got to say today. Onwards and upwards. Bye now.